I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom, drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. What a day. What a day. What a gun day. Wayne LaPierre at Crazy Pack. And look, you knew he was going to go to Crazy Pack. You knew they were going to use it as the sounding off place to push back against all us godless heathen liberals who don't want to get shot in the streets. Because that's the framing. They're in front of some of the most far out ideological right wing lunatics this country has to offer. One gathering right there. What's interesting though, oddly enough, no guns allowed at Crazy Pack. And you go, but no guns allowed. And you would think that would be the place. A whole room full of quote-unquote good guys and gals with guns. Just like the NRA conventions. I never understood why it's a gun convention. Why can't you have guns at the gun convention? Well, accidents happen. So Wayne gave a big speech at Crazy Pack today that caught the attention of, well, lots of people. And I looked at it, and it's what you would expect. It's the same MO every time we have one of these shootings, every time a horrible tragedy happens. It's the same. It's like they've got a template. And all they do is, push in today's information into their template. It's all the liberal media. It's those liberal Democrats and those political opportunists and those gun grabbers. They always want our guns. It's a socialist plot to eradicate individual freedom. Yes, Wayne. I want everyone's personal freedom stolen from them. I don't want you to be able to think. I don't want you to be able to walk across the street without my permission. I don't want you to breathe or do reproduce or anything without my permission. How ludicrous. I mean, honestly, truthfully, how ludicrous is the statement like Wayne's making? That, understand, you go back to the founding of the country. You had muskets. Those were the guns of the day. And the founding fathers said, yes, everyone in the militia should have one. And also understand that, George Washington actually signed a piece of legislation that said every person between the ages of 18 and I think it was 55 was to own a musket, a bunch of balls, some packing, some gunpowder, and a pack. It was all to be ready so that at the sound of a horn, the ring of a bell, the scream of, hey, they're coming, everyone goes, grabs their packs, lines up in formation, and bang, you have a military. That, my friends, is the reason for the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms in a well-freaking regulated militia. Now you've got this dimwit going, hey, they're going to take our guns and they're going to take our freedoms and we won't be able to shoot people. absolutely ludicrous. And what he's got, he's running around saying conservatives are just trying to, we're being smeared. He said the shameful politicization of tragedy. It's a classic strategy, he says, right out of the playbook of a poisonous movement. He said they hate the NRA, they hate the Second Amendment, they hate individual freedom. That's it. We hate you for your freedom. You got us red-handed. Look at that. Red, well, not really red, but close enough. His solution to our school shootings problem, obviously, is the talking point that we heard come out of Trump's mouth, and it's what we've heard from almost every commentator, which again shows you just how powerful the NRA, just how powerful they are. We need to harden our schools. Reminded me of the airline thing. We need to harden the cockpit doors. We just need to harden the doors of the school. That's all. That's it. We need more armed guards. Yet here we find out today that, lo and behold, there was a good guy with a gun at the school within a minute and a half of the first shot. He stood outside for 4 minutes in a secured position. Did not enter the school. And I argue that the sane, rational person, good guy with a gun or not, is not going to play John Rambo. Is not going to be Bruce Willis running in with a rubber band and a paper clip. He goes on to say that the NRA will speak out, and we will speak out louder, and we will speak out stronger than ever. And I'm reading, I'm watching this speech. And I'm hearing this guy who clearly is tone deaf to what's going on around us as a society. Clearly tone deaf. And, stoking the fears of all of the crazy pack people because the government's coming for you. I'm watching these kids. And the thing that I love about what they're doing is they don't care what your political position is. They don't care if you're an R or a D or an I or a V or what. They don't care. They've had enough. This generation has grown up practicing diving under desks. We're back to diving under desks again. Now, the difference was when I was a kid, we were practicing in the event that the Russians were going to bomb us and that mutual assured destruction was going to destroy the planet. And honestly and truthfully, we all looked at each other knowing it's not going to happen. And this is all kind of just, well, I don't know. The magic of the desk, I don't know. These kids in this day and age, it is a very real fear that some jolted lovers, some kid with a screw loose, some just angry, ticked off teenager is going to go home to grandpa's arsenal, go home and grab dad's gun and going to shoot the place up. And the more that it's on the news and the more that we put these people's names all over the place, the more it gets into someone's head. These kids have had to live through this their entire school lives. And yet you've got this guy who's completely tone deaf, that these kids have had enough. Now understand, these kids vote this November. A good number of this generation, and really we're going to see this, the largest generation right now. And what I've been arguing here recently, the next greatest generation, if you've looked at the fourth turning, it's their turn. Because things are going to get really bad really soon, and they're going to be the ones that have to mop everything up. Because, again, the adults can't figure out how to deal with this. Sane, rational people can figure this out. We don't need to protect our home military-style weapons. Sorry, you just don't. But yet here you've got this guy who I would argue the reason we're in the place that we're in is because of Wayne LaPierre himself. The NRA has, you go back to when the assault weapons ban happened. You saw dramatically the number of people killed in these mass shootings drop. And predictably, as soon as it was gone, what did we see? We saw them go back up. Predictably. It doesn't take a rocket scientist, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you put these kind of weapons into the hands of, the mentally ill, the angry, the abusers, you name it, that dangerous things happen. And yet, here you've got this guy who's a very powerful guy. Understand, the NRA is, I would argue, one of the most powerful lobby arms in this country because they are so active and their people are so insane. I've had people tell me that they know some of the folks who their kids were killed in Newtown. And to this day, there are people who still terrorize those families because they have the audacity to say we shouldn't have these kind of guns. Now, nobody's talking about taking your shotgun or your pistol or any of that. Nobody's talking about that. That's not even on the table, and it's not something that I would advocate for. I believe if you feel unsafe in your home and you think that a shotgun makes you feel better, by all means, go get yourself a shotgun. Even though we know that when guns are in the home, the chance of accidents and suicide and all of the other horrors, shooting somebody unintentionally, all of those things go up. But if it makes you feel better in your home to have that, well, by all means. But this idea of having these killing machines so easily accessible is just plain dumb to me. And the argument that you're talking about gun control, we've already got gun control. It's a matter, as I've been saying all along, it's a matter of where you draw the line. Nobody's talking about knocking on everyone's door and taking all of their guns. The thing I did find interesting in LaPierre's speech, though, and again, you got to understand who he's talking to. He's talking to the crazy of the crazy. What we used to call the tinfoil hat crowd, who have now put on suits and ties, who have now, gotten college degrees on being crazy. He's pushing this thing that the Justice Department is weaponizing their power to punish political enemies. And when he said that, when he alluded to that, I'm thinking, the Trump administration is doing that. And I agree with him on this. But it's interesting that he brings that up. But here again, it doesn't matter if they're in power or not, because Republicans control all three branches of government. They control the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches of our government. There's no debating that. So the chances of actual gun reform happening are slim and none, and Slim got shot in another shooting. But I look at this and, the fear-mongering that goes on. He went on at one point and read really very slowly. History proves it. Every time, in every nation, in which this political disease rises to power, its citizens are repressed, their freedoms are destroyed, and their firearms are banned and confiscated. And I will agree that in, certain fascist-type regimes, yes, that happens. Nobody's talking about that here. We're talking about these weapons where you had an armed deputy standing outside of a door who was completely outgunned. And you've got this sheriff going, he should have gone in. All by himself, he's going to run in with his little pea shooter. And maybe I would have, maybe you would have, maybe you wouldn't have. But you think about it on the plane of, and in the image of the cops in Los Angeles, if you remember back in the 90s, that moment when the assault weapons ban became, extremely well needed, where you had these bank robbers who were in the middle of the street with machine guns, and really just heavy artillery, just, picking cops off and shooting things up with body armor, just walking down the street. That's kind of the situation this guy probably thought he was in. So to me, the idea of hardening the schools, I'm sorry, that's not the answer. We had a good guy in the school with a gun. It didn't help. And at the end, all of this stuff that we're talking about, all of the distractions, and the NRA speech here is about the distraction. At the end of the day, it was the gun that killed all these people. And yes, the idiot who had the gun, he pulled the trigger. But without it, he was just moving his finger around. It's the gun. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. What do we do with this? Do we need more policemen in schools? Should we, as someone emailed me, take troops out of Afghanistan and put them in every school across this country at every entrance in full military garb with body armor and M16s and the whole lot? Should we have drones? Maybe drones would be a better opportunity. We could have drones flying up and down the hall. Love to hear your thoughts. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'll talk a little bit about infrastructure. The president's plan, $1.5 trillion, I think he threw out as a wish number. His budget only put $200 billion up. I'm not sure how that math works out. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about that. I'll get some thoughts on how we rebuild our nation's infrastructure. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
90% of the wealth. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2004. That was the day Secretary of Education Rod Page stated that he considered the National Education Association to be a terrorist organization. He made the remarks during a meeting with governors who were visiting the White House. His apology a few hours later was just as inflammatory. There he expressed his frustration at the, quote, obstructionist scare tactics the NEA's Washington lobbyists have employed against No Child Left Behind's historic reforms. Representing almost 3 million educators, the NEA had been fighting many aspects of the No Child Left Behind Act passed by Congress in 2001. The teachers' unions had initially supported the measure, but they came to realize that the act was designed to undermine public education in favor of charter, private, and religious schools. No Child Left Behind mandated regular standardized testing of students. It also threatened financial penalties and school closures. Governors on board with the goals of the act soon grew frustrated. The Bush administration reneged on federal funding necessary for its implementation. The union movement was outraged at Page's smear. John Sweeney, then president of the AFL-CIO, said, quote, the Bush administration would like to label all those who disagree with it as terrorists in order to cover up its policies, which are harmful to working families and to divert attention from its inability to create good jobs. By 2015, the No Child Left Behind Act had received so much criticism from every corner that the Every Student Succeeds Act replaced it. This act retains Common Core standards but transfers school accountability to the states. It is now pending review under President Donald Trump's Regulatory Freeze Directive. In 2017, it was pending review under President Donald Trump's Regulatory Freeze Directive.
Rebuilding America. The Rick Smith Show. America. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. And it's not just of repair, and it's been that way for, I would argue, a couple of decades as politicians continue to say, hey, we're giving tax breaks. For instance, we just gave it, $1.5 trillion away? That could have easily been used to rebuild our roads and our bridges and our airports and all of the things that we need to compete in the 21st century. Gave it away. And what are we going to invest over the next decade? $200 billion, which doesn't put us anywhere on the path to solving the problem that we have. And you look at the American Society of Civil Engineers report that says, we're about what I think $4.6 trillion in the hole right now. And down the road, it only gets much worse. We're here to talk a little bit about our infrastructure woes, the Trump scheme, the Republican plan, and what we should be doing. I've asked Kevin DeGood to come talk with us. He is the director of the infrastructure policy program there at the Center for American Progress. Kevin, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So here we are. We're at this moment. Last I saw, you've got the American Society of Civil Engineers saying what we're 4.6 trillion just to get even, and I'm not seeing anything coming out of Washington that makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside that we're going to do anything to close that gap.
That's right. And in fact, it's even a little bit worse than that. If we look at the budget for fiscal 2019 that the White House just put out, we actually see that the administration is calling for more cuts to federal infrastructure spending than their new plan would have us believe. So they call for $280 billion in cuts to a number of core federal infrastructure programs, and the plan would only provide $200 billion. So that's a cut of about $1.40 for every $1 of.
Worse than even I think, and I think it's pretty darn bad.
That's right. So this is really a complete bait and switch of the Trump administration and the American people. I mean, when he campaigned, it was an unambiguous promise to spend $1 trillion to help bring America's infrastructure up to a state of good repair, to allow us to be competitive, to allow people to have access to job and educational opportunities. And what we see is that it's really just a scam. And I guess it shouldn't surprise us, because so much of his history as a businessman was one of a lot of broken promises and broken contracts and bankruptcy. So I guess it shouldn't surprise us too much. But it is certainly disappointing, because as a nation, we do need a great deal of infrastructure investment.
Yeah, well, let me ask you that, because he said when he was running, he's the king of debt. Can't we just run up a bunch of debt and build what we need and then just file bankruptcy? Can't we just do that?
Well, I don't think we want to file for bankruptcy. Argentina and Greece would seem to suggest that's a really terrible idea. And unfortunately, we're now further into the hole. So this recent Republican tax bill is going to add to our national debt approximately $1.5 trillion. And that makes it all the harder for us to go out and make the investments that we need in infrastructure. To put it in perspective, under the Republican tax bill, the average worker who earns $1 million a year in 2018 will receive a $70,000 tax cut.
Wow. That's more than the vast majority of people in this country make in a year.
Yeah, I mean, the median household income, I haven't looked this up in a little while. I want to say it's maybe $58,000 or $59,000. So that's a tax cut that's larger than what the average American household is bringing in a year. And
the thing is what gets me is, I don't know, if you're making that kind of money, do you need it? And I know that's not how we should be looking at it. But I think back to my grandparents' generation. You go back to the good socialist president Dwight David Eisenhower and their tax code, where the top marginal rate, where if you were making over $1 million, was somewhere I guess in the 80% range, and if you were making more, was up to 92%.
Right, and I think it comes down to this notion of what are productive expenditures and what are unproductive expenditures. Giving a tax cut to a multinational corporation or somebody making more than $1 million a year doesn't really stimulate anything. That money simply lands in a bank account and sits there overwhelmingly. Whereas if you take that same amount of money and you put it into the economy as a direct expenditure on the reconstruction, repair, and building of new infrastructure systems, those systems then generate economic returns and social value for decades to come. So it's not just a number, it's what are you doing with that expenditure? In the tax cut scenario, it's incredibly unproductive and wasteful, and in the infrastructure expenditure, it's productive over many decades.
Right. I often say that one of the biggest missed opportunities I think we've ever had as a nation was, right after President Obama took office, there was an opportunity to borrow money at actually negative interest rates, where we could have really rebuilt our infrastructure. We could have really gotten the economy moving much faster at an earlier time. But yet you have these ideologues, these austerity hounds, if you will, who now seem to be, the borrow and squander crowd. It just seems to me that in such a short period of time, we went from tighten the belt, we need austerity, to, hey, spend as much as we can and squander it on wealthy folks, while still not doing anything about our infrastructure. It seems like a really big missed opportunity.
I agree, and I think what we need to do moving forward as progressives is to push a vision for infrastructure investment that has 5 characteristics. We need it to be robust, comprehensive, equitable, sustainable, and targeted. And by that I mean we need at least $1 trillion of direct federal spending above what we currently spend over the next 10 years. We want it to be comprehensive so that it's not just about roads and bridges, but we get into transit, passenger rail, aviation, clean drinking water, affordable housing, renewable energy, school reconstruction and expansion. We want to hit all of these core sectors. It needs to be equitable in that we want to make sure that we're building infrastructure that creates opportunity for everyone and not just a select few. It needs to be sustainable in that we want to protect our natural environments, protect wildlife, and protect our communities, as well as helping the United States to meet its long-term global climate commitments. And we also want it to be targeted. So we want to make sure that when those dollars leave Washington, we're directing them to the projects and, more importantly, to the communities that face the greatest needs. And that's really what I think we've got to push, and we've got to let people know that that's what the progressive vision is for infrastructure.
Yeah, so we're not just going to be building roads to nowhere. Even though, look, I'm in favor of building lots of stuff. But here's the thing. I mean, I look at the scheme that's being put out, and you said you wanted $1 trillion of investment. They're saying the Trump plan is $1.5 trillion. Although it's only $200 billion, they're saying that it's going to have this multiplier effect, and when Wall Street gets its hands on it, there's going to be magic, and there'll be dust falling from the heavens, and rivers of gold and honey, and fairies flying all around, and it's going to be magic. It's going to be just like magic.
It's important to remember that the bulk of that is actually a presumption that governors and mayors and county executives are going to go out and raise state and local taxes. So most of that money is really coming from state and local governments. And again, in sort of classic Trump fashion, he's handing off all the really hard work of raising revenues to somebody else and wanting to take all the political credit and claim that there's this great national plan. And what's embedded in that are quite often taxes like gas taxes, vehicle registration fees, sales taxes that are on balance more regressive, that are on balance going to hit working and middle-class families harder. So again, if we come back to this tax question, it's let's cut tax rates for corporations and for wealthy individuals, and then let's turn around and put pressure on governors and mayors to raise taxes that are more regressive. So I think, again, this shows us what the true vision is of this administration, and it's to put burdens on people that actually need assistance.
Yeah, but doesn't that sound really kind of stupid? Look, I drove a truck for years, and I can tell you where county lines ended by how good or how bad the roads were. You could find out where the state line was because, one's going to New Jersey, the roads are a little bit better than they are in Pennsylvania. Go into New York through New Jersey, and the roads are much worse in New York. It just seems to me that there's got to be someone at the top going, wait a minute, we can't have these kind of disparities. We have to have, some overall plan to where you're not pitting areas against each other based on their ability to raise funds. At least maybe that's my thought.
No, you raise an incredibly important point, and that is by sort of throwing your hands up in Washington and saying, we're not going to do anything, it's up to you on the ground. What you're really doing is creating a policy that exacerbates existing economic inequalities and political divisions. The Trump administration has pointed to the sales tax increase that voters approved in Los Angeles County in 2016, known as Measure R, and that was a tremendous accomplishment and will deliver a great deal of money to the region to build needed projects in the coming decades. But it's important to step back and remember that Los Angeles County is somewhat unique in that it has an annual GDP of more than $700 billion. So that is not necessarily a model that more economically hard-hit communities can follow. For those folks, they really do need those resources to come directly from the federal government. And this plan not only doesn't provide them, but in combination with the budget would actually be a cut.
Yeah. We keep hearing a lot of talk about public-private partnerships, and I've said, from the beginning, I'm not opposed to the idea as long as we do it like we used to. We take public money, we hire private entities to build our roads or whatever we want, and then we own them. What this seems to be is we're going to use public money. We're going to hand it off. The private sector is going to build it and then own it. And my fear is that we end up like going into New York City, where every time you go over a bridge, you're basically putting your arm out to give a pint of blood. And that, to me, is no way to run a transportation system.
Right. Well, the administration has often tried to give the impression that the private sector is going to be willing to put up large amounts of capital in a way that almost makes it sound like it's a gift. But at the end of the day, there is no free money. Anytime the private sector invests in an infrastructure project, they expect a return on that investment, and a very substantial one.
Yep.
So, for instance, if we look at the average interest rate that a state or local government pays on a municipal bond to borrow money to build a project, these days, if you have a decent credit rating, that's maybe 3 or 3.5%. By comparison, when a private equity investor puts money into an infrastructure deal, they're looking for 10 to 15% annual returns. So if you want to think about that in terms of maybe your mortgage or a credit card, the difference between paying, say, 3% on a mortgage or 15% on a mortgage is enormous. And it's the same for the public sector. It raises the cost. Now, there can be certain narrow circumstances in which using a public-private partnership model that includes private equity can make sense, but they're a very, very small number, and it almost misses the point about a true national infrastructure program to talk about these few narrow examples where a P3 might make sense.
Yeah, so the president the other day said that he was in favor of a 25-cent per gallon gas tax. Is that the way forward? Because look, we got to pay for this one way or another. In my view, we want decent roads, we want decent bridges. I don't want my car to have to be inspected or the front end aligned every 3 or 4 months. We got to pay for it. Is 25 cents too much? Is that the way to go? I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is repeal this most recent tax bill and bring those revenues back into the Treasury. And once we've done that, if there's still some leftover need that revenue doesn't cover, then I think we could have a conversation about possibly increasing the gas tax. But I think it's immoral to talk about that beforehand. To put it in perspective, the president's talking about a 25-cent increase in the gas tax. I want to say that's about 136% increase over what it is today, and that would add about $135 or $140 a year to the average person's federal gas tax bill. So it's not an insignificant amount of money when we talk about increasing the gas tax by 25 cents.
All right. So last question I've got for you. What do you got against streetcars?
Well,
I like streetcars. They're fun.
You like streetcars, you do. Well, my problem with them is that they're often much slower than buses, and they get stuck because unlike buses, they can't swerve to get around somebody who's making a right-hand turn or a car that's broken down or a jaywalking pedestrian. So I think they're too slow and not flexible enough.
Yeah, but they're fun. And if you're dumb enough to get caught on the tracks, shame on you. That's how we thin the herd.
No comment. No comment.
Kevin, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Take care. Have a good one.
Great talking with you. Kevin DeGood, he's the director of the Infrastructure Policy Program there at the Center for American Progress. Quick break, right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Get away. Money. It's a gas. Grab that cash with both hands and make a stash.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1860. That was the day that the shoemakers of Lynn, Massachusetts walked out on strike. The shoemakers were very concerned over how technology was changing their work. Shoemaking had long been considered a skilled craft. Making shoes was typically done as piecework in the homes of the craftsmen. Often, other family members, including the women of the household, helped to make the shoes. But technological advances transformed the industry. The introduction of the Singer sewing machine in 1852 moved more shoemaking into factories. Many young women went to work stitching at these machines. What was once considered highly skilled work was now transforming into mass production. Then, to make matters worse, in 1857, a depression swept across the nation. Shoemakers saw their wages slashed. In response, on George Washington's birthday, the shoemakers went out on strike. They demanded an industry-wide standard wage. 20,000 workers joined the strike. 20,000 more supported the striking workers at protests and parades. 2 weeks into the conflict, women from the factories took to the streets, joining the strike. But the male shoemakers were weary of joining their cause to that of the women. Predictably, this division aided in causing the strike to falter and fade. Although the strike was not successful, it drew national attention to the plight of workers. During the conflict, presidential candidate Abraham Lincoln spoke out in support of the workers. He said, "I'm glad to see that a system of labor prevails in New England in which laborers can strike when they want to, where they are not obliged to labor whether you pay them or not. I like a system that lets a man quit when he wants to and wish it might prevail everywhere." Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show. Most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So I'm reading this story. Evidently, there was a good guy with a gun at the school there in Parkland, Florida. Evidently, decided he was going to hang out outside for 4 minutes as the shooting went on, positioned himself outside the door, never went in, and I guess the sheriff's saying he should have gone in. And you go, look, it's a war zone. Good guy had a gun, didn't engage the shooter. So, to me, it's like, understand this theory of we're going to put a whole bunch of people with guns. Most people are they're gonna look for cover. Next, can we talk about the gun? Just a little bit, maybe? Just kind of a thought. Anyway, here to talk about what's going on around the world in Washington, D.C., Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So what do you think of this? Are you surprised that the deputy positioned himself outside the door and sought shelter?
Well, I don't know I didn't get to read the full story, but I think part of it, I assumed he was going to, see at some point in time how he could get in or, take a shot. But I didn't read the full report, but they did a video camera and then he resigned. So
yeah. No, I mean, at the end of it, the guy, you're right. He was looking for a shot in. He's not going to just go running through the front door like a cowboy and get gunned down himself. But here again, it's this idea that, and I think we watch too much TV. I think there's too many of these movies where Rambo goes running in with a single, with a slingshot, or you've got, what was the Bruce Willis character, who figures out how to do something with a Twinkie. I mean, we've just got this idealized image of how this stuff plays out.
I haven't read a detail yet. Did the school? It didn't have a locked door system. Do you know?
I didn't know. They haven't released a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I haven't seen that anywhere.
I mean, it's possible the door was locked and the guy couldn't get in.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah, it's crazy. Let's move on. The big news of the day. Not even Friday, and it's Mueller time. Some indictments today, right?
Right, 32, and I actually did read them. They're in categories. Basically, in a nutshell, whatever Manafort was indicted for, if he was indicted for 4 falsifications of income tax, Gates was indicted for it. Assistant, there was some charges on what they say are assisting somebody to falsify. So that, I'm assuming, is Gates helping Manafort, to do that, and vice versa. And then there were some dealing with loans, specific amounts, Rick, 9.5 million. There was something dealing with, I believe, 1.3 million. There were a series of indictments. Both were indicted for that. So I'm assuming on that one, it's going to be falsification of bank loans, so bank fraud, basically. Now, as you look through the 32 indictments, and I did want to point this out because it was raised to me, in other arenas today, about, well, doesn't this go away from the Russians, and Trump in the Trump campaign? But I reread the exact nature of what Mueller is tasked to do, and it says the Trump campaign, Russian collusion potential, and anything else discovered in the course of the investigation.
Right. So kind of the catch-all of whatever they find, whatever criminal activity was going on, regardless of what it was a matter of, he's got an obligation to bring that forward as an officer of the court, right?
Oh, correct. And so, but I wanted to point that out because people are saying, well, he's now gone beyond the scope. Well, the scope includes anything else that's found. I still think that Paul Manafort is the main target for all of this, because if you're going to look at Trump, the campaign, or collusion, then Manafort, who was brought on after Corey Lewandowski, was fired right before the Republican convention. Manafort stayed on after that point in time, so he was the key guy all the way through the campaign. Yeah. I don't think Flynn is of much use to them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, so what happens with Gates? Because Gates, just kind of is in the process of cutting a plea, right?
Well, yes, Gates at 2 o'clock. Now, we don't know a lot of detail, but at 2 o'clock yesterday was filing paperwork, and it seems to be a change of attorney. So I'm assuming on that he's readying some type of a plea or additional plea. We don't know exactly what they've done.
Yeah, I mean, so when I saw these extra charges, I'm going, so what happens with that? I mean, the intrigue. And again, like I said, not even Friday. So I'm wondering what's going to happen tomorrow.
I mean, I don't know. I think it's going to continue, on and on and on. I don't expect it. Somebody speculated today it will go past the election. I don't really think it will. I don't think it will go past the presidential election. I really don't.
Yeah, well, I hope it doesn't go past the presidential. I'm hoping it doesn't. I'm hoping it's done before the midterms.
Mm-hmm. I had predicted it would be done by July. It was a prediction I made for Talk Media News.
All right, that seems about where a lot of people are telling me. I've got some friends who are saying it's not going to get past April. I think that's a bit soon, but we'll see. Right. But interesting stuff. And your friend, you're friends with Corey Lewandowski, right? Didn't he run some of your campaigns?
He ran 2 of my campaigns. He was with us for 4 years, and that was 1998 through approximately 2001.
So how has he stayed out of all of this? I mean, did he get out at the right time? Because I keep wondering if his name's going to get drug into this as well.
He hasn't, and I don't know any of the specifics, what he did or didn't do, or what he was involved with, but he has stated categorically on many of the media shows that he had no involvement with it, and I don't think he did. In fact, I would argue that once Corey Lewandowski left that campaign, in came Paul Manafort, who is a deep Russian connection. Corey Lewandowski is not a Russian connection.
Right.
Paul Manafort made money off the Ukraine, off of the figures in the Ukraine. The Ukraine are tied, the oligarchy, of Russia. So I think actually maybe if they had kept Lewandowski, maybe there wouldn't have been the ability to have this deep Russia connection that everybody talks about.
Yeah. So let me ask you. You've been around this game a long time. You know how the money flows. Are you taking any credence in the statements that Russian money flowed through the NRA into some of these campaigns, and there's a bunch of this Russian money that's underlying all this, which is why we're not hearing a lot of people really coming out with full-throated endorsements of the investigation?
No, I don't think so. I really don't. I think the Russians used other figures, people that did advertisement, people that were here. I think there's a lot of Americans that unwittingly, whoever knowingly did it, they'll find them. But I think a lot of Americans unwittingly were connected, you know, through, there was some lady that, I don't know what she did, but they contacted her. And so some of those things could happen. I don't think they did the money flow thing. I really don't. I think they spent money, but
they did
in hiring people and ads and things like that.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Let's move on. Evidently, the Trump himself has come out and said that I guess he's in favor of bumping up the age restriction to 21 to buy guns.
Yes, he's come out with several things which, you know, it's not making some of the NRA base happy, obviously, but he's coming out talking about background checks. Now that would be also in the area of mental health checks, which, by the way, I firmly believe they can do if they want to without invading their privacy. There's a way to do it if they have the will. So he's talked about that. His most controversial comment was arming the teachers, which I don't think is a starter, period. That's not going to happen. And then the third thing is the age. Now, people are talking about that. Let's look at what that does, though, Rick, and at least in my opinion. If we're going to look at the age of purchasing certain weapons, which would, go towards the automatic weapon that was used.
Right.
Now the whole conversation is about the age. It's not about the weapon. You see where I'm going with that?
No,
it's not about eliminating the weapon. It's about now the age.
No, it's anything to distract us away from it's the gun. And I keep coming back to the good guy with a gun thing next. The age thing to me isn't important. The background checks, yes, but at the end of the day, it's still the gun. When I was a kid, if you'd have put some of these weapons into the hands of some of the kids I grew up with, neighborhoods would be gone. It's the gun. We didn't have those when I was a kid. And to have access to these kind of killing machines, to me, that's where the focus has to be. It's the gun. All the other stuff, to me, is a distraction.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other day, a young lady said to me, look, I'm 19 and I have a child and I have a right to have a gun in my house. And I believe that. I'm personally am a believer in that. But I said that ban is not applying to that gun unless, if you have an assault weapon, which she doesn't have, she has a shotgun and a handgun.
Yep.
But people hear that. She said, well, I'm 19. I said, I highly doubt they're going to change that for that type of gun.
Right. Now, but here's the thing. And, I have people I know who are policemen and, people who are home security experts and all of that stuff. They say the best thing you can get is a dog, one. And if you have to have a firearm, a shotgun that makes that really great noise. That noise usually makes people stop and run.
It also helps if your aim, frankly, honestly, I'm not, if you got a better chance with a shotgun.
Oh, exactly. But it's that sound. Somebody goes, uh-oh,
sure.
there's somebody with a gun.
Wow.
Turn and run. Because most people, when there's a gun involved, even if they have one, they will turn and go.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes that kind of sense. Mm-hmm. But a dog, first and foremost, best piece of home safety device you can get.
Sure.
There you go. Let's move along. Evidently, the president is considering punishing California for its immigration stance.
Well, a lot of people would say California needs punished for something, but I don't think immigration would be the way that, to do it. What he's saying is because they don't enforce the laws, then they just don't need immigration officers. The theory on that, I think, is then people would flood California, illegally, and then they would want our help. But by that time, we would have to quadruple the amount of people we sent in to get the people that were let in while we weren't out there.
Yeah, it's one of those threats of we're going to cause even more chaos, just to spite you, I think.
Right, exactly.
And finally, some new numbers out on the substance abuse deaths. I guess we're at a record level, huh?
We are up 11%. It is a record level. And if you look further into the statistics, the African American community up 39%, Latino community up 24%, white community up 19%. Every single, and of course it's an equal opportunity killer, so it's not a matter of race. But I did want to point out the statistics are very, very dire, especially for the African American community. And people that are active in recovery and active in volunteering for recovery we know people that have died personally. In a small town, 9 to 10 people that are dead. And the amount of people dying, I mean, this is catastrophic. And people can say, well, they're addicts, they should know better. These are people that have gotten hooked on drugs and need help to get off of them.
Yeah, and I would argue a big part of it is also the economy. I mean, there are so many people struggling in this economy, and poverty a big driver in my view. And you can disagree with me if you think I'm wrong, but I think poverty is one of the biggest drivers of our addiction problems.
It's a factor, but in recovery, I mean, I've seen people from every single walk of life. It's almost like proliferation, and a lot of people that I personally have dealt with, the addiction started at the age of 14, so it's spreading in kind of all the communities, in the suburbs, in the inner cities. I mean, it's just absolutely everywhere. Poverty obviously doesn't help.
Yeah. So what's the answer to this? I mean, I got an email not too long ago from a woman that just blew my mind, because she was mad that evidently here somewhere in the area, there was one person who had OD'd like 5 times in a day, and the police and paramedics were called, and there's this drug, this Narcan, I guess, that they've administered to this person 5 times in one day. And she was of the mindset, you once, that's all you get, and then after that you're on your own. And I'm going, wow, how cold-hearted.
Well, yeah, and let me just give you an example. If somebody shoots 3 people, they shoot them from their car, right? And the police chase them, and that car crashes, and that person that did the shooting is injured. What happens? Severely injured. Goes to a hospital, has surgery, has treatment, follow-up. Maybe it costs $175,000, right? And we don't question it. We would treat them just because they committed the crime. Has no difference, right?
Right.
If a person goes to the emergency room of a hospital and is an active addict, methamphetamine, heroin, whatever, and they need help, zero. Good luck. Yeah. You have insurance? Fine. So there's ways to, we can pay now or pay later, the chaos, everything. In the prison system, which I'm personally familiar with, having, done time at Morgantown Federal, I can tell you it's warehousing. They are addicts. These are not the big drug cartel people. These are addicts that are in prison. We could save money. We could have rehab and save the taxpayers money on top. If we want to put this beyond the human trauma, let's talk about money. We can save money, but it's not being addressed. So they need treatment, people do, and they don't get it. And again, I just use that example. We don't think twice if it's an automobile accident, but you walk into an emergency room and you need to go to rehab. In most cases, although there's great rehab centers that try to provide, in most cases you have insurance or you don't go.
I mean, it's amazing how screwed up a lot of our systems are. As someone pointed out to me yesterday, that had the cop who was outside the door shot the shooter at that school, that shooter would have gotten medical care. But some of the people who got shot, if they don't have health insurance, they're out of luck.
Yeah, well, I use that example of somebody committing a criminal act versus somebody that goes in that needs help with addiction.
It's crazy. Just crazy stuff. Bob, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick.
As always, our good friend Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968, and striking sanitation workers staged a sit-in at the City Council meeting in Memphis, Tennessee. The striking workers were members of AFSCME Local 1733. They had been on strike for 10 days. Their demands included union recognition, a pay increase, a grievance procedure, and end to workplace discrimination. Also at issue was workplace safety. February 1st, 1968 was a rainy day. 2 black sanitation workers, Eckel Cole and Robert Walker, sought shelter from the heavy rain in the only place city rules allowed them to be, in the back of their garbage truck with the trash. Tragedy struck, and both men were crushed to death due to faulty equipment. The strike started soon after. At the city council sit-in, hours passed with neither side backing down. As the hours wore on, the union brought in sandwiches for their members. Finally, the city council capitulated. But the mayor of Memphis still refused to recognize the union. The sanitation workers' struggle garnered the attention of civil rights leaders, including Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King came to Memphis to support the striking workers. While on the trip, King was assassinated coming out of the Lorraine Motel. As the country mourned Dr. King's death, the strike wore on, lasting 65 days before the city settled under heavy pressure from Washington, D.C. Memphis officials met most of the strikers' demands. During the strike, the black sanitation workers carried a sign that read simply, "I am a man." Pickets with this simple, dignified, and powerful statement became one of the iconic images of the civil rights movement. The slogan is still used today at civil rights and labor marches. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Trap, trap, trap till the cages fall. The cages fall. Stay awake in the dark. Count mistakes. The light was off.
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
Day is new, and everyone is waiting on you.
So I'm not sure what it is about our Republican friends, but the sexual harassment stuff seems to be ramping up. The Louisiana Secretary of State, a guy named Tom Shedler, he evidently is accused of sexual harassment. A lawsuit filed today claims that he had, over the past, I guess over a decade, and you got to give him credit for persistence, sent cards and bottles of wine and roses and all kinds of flowery poems and and the woman kept telling him, no, go away, stop. And well, the report is that he retaliated, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. And you go, at what point is it you can't take no for an answer? And I never understood that. I guess I just never understood. Also today, the big news coming out of Missouri, the governor there, Eric Greitens, he evidently, was really, had all of the credentials to be the next rising Republican star. Evidently, back 2015, he called a woman over to his house. I guess it was his hairdresser. He tied her up to some exercise rings and took half-nude pictures of her, and then I guess kept them. And then when he ran for governor, he wanted to run for governor, he evidently threatened to expose her exposed pictures. And you go, this is one of those things where you probably shouldn't have done that if you're ambitious and your ambitions were to run for political office. Because here's the guy, well, before he even really ran for governor or even had a chance of winning, he had already had Eric Greitens for president.com purchased. So, I mean, talking about putting the cart in front of the horse, hasn't even won as the governor yet, and he's already looking to the White House. Just, sometimes you just look at these folks, and I know, look, we're all human. We all make mistakes. We all do dumb stuff. Lord knows I've done my share of dumb stuff. But if you're going to throw yourself into that arena, don't do dumb stuff. And then don't lie about it. Don't cover it up. It's always the cover up. It's always the cover up. It's always the attempt that people try to make to try and not get caught. And then they end up getting caught, and it's only worse in the end. Well, there you go. And I'm waiting for the next one. Look, there'll be more. And it's not only Republicans. So all of my Republican friends don't get all up in arms. He's only picking on us. No, it's all of these folks. And there's part of me thinks it's the power. It's that I'm in a powerful position, and I'm hoping a lot of women win come November in the elections. Really am. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you're listening on a station that only picks up the first hour, head on over to thericksmithshow.com for hour 2. For everyone else, stick around. Right back.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
Your working-class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Working hard to make a left. Rain shed from rain. Father, son, like to carry on. Blue denim, hell is vain. Oh, he's a working class man.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the big news yesterday was the governor of West Virginia, Jim Justice, you may know as the Democratic governor of West Virginia, turned Republican Trumpkin almost overnight. He signed a piece of legislation that would, the way it looks like, bestow a 2% raise upon the teachers of West Virginia and all the education people, about 2%. And then each of the next 2 years, as I get it, a 1% raise. And I don't know about you, but that's nowhere near the cost of inflation. So basically, every year it appears to me that West Virginia's teachers and educators and staff and all those folks are going to continue to fall behind, even starting from way behind everyone else. Because I read something that said, West Virginia's educators are like $20,000 paid less than the people around them, which is just insane to me. So today, the teachers, the educators in all 55 counties across the state of West Virginia went out on strike, went out on what I'm calling a general strike, which I think is just fantastic. And here to talk a little bit about the day of action and tomorrow as well, I've asked Christine Campbell to come talk with us. She's the president of AFT West Virginia. Christine, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So am I getting this right? The former Democrat turned Trumpkin 2% raise this year, one each of the next 2 years. Am I getting that right?
That is the bill that he signed yesterday. When he came out as State of the State, he proposed a 1% over 5 years. Each percent included teachers and service personnel for a couple of years, and then just teachers the last years. And then through the legislative process, it ended up being on a total of 5% over 5 years, but a total of 4% over 3 years. So we actually even went backwards a little bit during the legislative process.
Wow.
This year.
And as I understand, West Virginia's teachers are some of the lowest paid teachers in the entire country, right?
We are actually at 48, and all of our surrounding states pay anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 more. In 2014, we did receive a salary increase that got us up to 46, and by from 15 to 16 dropped back to 48. So in addition to lack of salary increases, we've also seen increases in our health insurance costs and reduction in benefits every single year. And of course, the governor worked with the legislature to put a freeze on that, but there is no consistent funding stream to offset the cost of rising health care for it. So our folks are actually seeing their checks go down, not up.
So basically today was a reaction to that and a collective, we're not taking this you-know-what anymore. And your teachers and educators and all the folks took to the streets today all across the state, right?
Yes, we're about 6,000 people in the Capitol, We had roughly 2,000 people outside the Capitol on Canal Boulevard is where our Capitol is, and they stayed out with informational pickets. We had informational pickets all across the state within those respective counties, and we had volunteers for the food banks that make sure that students get food over the weekend. They made sure that it would continue for today and tomorrow, and volunteering with community centers that provide daycare for students that didn't have a place to be today and tomorrow. So it's been an amazing movement. It started at the local level. Folks really coming out on social media and calling their legislators. From the minute of the introduced rollover bills from last year, they were saying this is not making West Virginia public education a priority. Yeah. And their voices have been heard loud and clear, and it was really an exciting day to have all 55 counties either at home or at the Capitol standing up for public education and their students.
And it's not just the teachers themselves. I mean, the fact that you guys are, thinking about the kids who aren't going to have a meal today because, school lunch programs and breakfast programs and teachers who bring things so kids can take home and all of that stuff. You're thinking about, taking care of them if they don't have anywhere to go. To me, that's, I guess it's exactly what I would expect from a teacher.
Oh, these folks are amazing. I mean, the things that they do for their students. When we decided to call this action based on the authorization votes and did kind of a local leaders call and said, reach out to your communities, your churches, make sure the students are getting fed, they said, oh, we've already done that. So they were ahead of any kind of direction when it came to making sure their kids were going to be okay in the event that an action was called. So this has been, I've talked with teachers and no teachers that it's just amazing what they go through for the students and how this has directly affected them and their children. We have a teacher telling that she works at Hardee's, a fast food chain, on Saturdays and Sundays to make ends meet when she really wants to be planning for her next week with her students. We have a teacher who has lupus and does not take her medication because she just can't afford it. So these things are just so heartbreaking, and it's so frustrating to them to be talking to their legislators and hear them say, well, we just can't do anymore. We'll look at it down the road. This has been going on for as long as I've been here. I've been the president for 5 years, and prior to that with the issue with health insurance and lack of competitive pay in West Virginia. And our teachers want to stay here.
Yeah. So is it that the governor and the legislature, is it that they don't respect teachers in public education? Is it that they're trying to destroy it and trying to drive all the teachers out? Or is it they just don't care? It's not a priority.
Well, I think, just for the last few years since the majority in the House and the Senate has changed, that we have seen attempts for charter schools. We don't have charter schools in West Virginia, but since these folks have become the majority in the House and the Senate, then we have seen charter school bills. We've seen education savings accounts, which is a form of vouchers. We've seen attempts to reduce our seniority. We've seen the Paycheck Protection Bill, which actually tries to silence our members' voices by making it harder and harder for them to have their union dues deducted from their paycheck.
Wow.
So this isn't just about salary and benefits. It's about their working conditions. It's about their seniority rates. And when we have 727 vacancies, teaching position vacancies in West Virginia, they see the classroom right next to them that does not have a highly qualified, experienced teacher in it, and how that can directly affect the students as this becomes more and more prevalent. So they've watched They're paying attention. They're saying, how many of these things can you push on us and not make sure that we have proper funding, that we have the resources, and we have highly qualified people here? We're just not going to take it anymore. We're coming to Charleston.
And good on the teachers. And I've been saying for a very long time, it's going to be the teachers. It's going to be the educated union members. Hopefully that will save the labor movement, because they are the most articulate, the most able to reach out to parents and to families. And because look, I don't know anyone who says I want a worse public school system other than some charter advocates. But I got to ask the question. As you're looking at this, then, since all of the charter cocktail bills seem to be there, all of the attacks on teachers are right there, does this appear to be an attempt to create a crisis so that they can say, well, look, the public schools can't do it, we need to hand this off to the private sector? I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, this legislature has been giving tax breaks. So what we've done is we've reduced revenue, and the first system that is directly affected by that is public education. So there's a bill to take away the business inventory tax. Well, the money that is generated from that business inventory tax goes into public education. So not only are you affecting the system as you reduce that tax and get rid of it down the road, but you're also losing that revenue, so you can't do anything to fund any kind of pay raise. So everything, it's the classic live within your means rhetoric that is causing this problem. And I think that as much as they say we want public education to be at the forefront, we know that businesses look to communities and say, okay, how good are your schools when we decide if we're going to bring a business here? They're not saying, what's the cost of your inventory tax? They're saying, what are your schools like? So I think it's just not really focusing on the most important thing. We want an educated workforce. We want highly qualified educators to develop that workforce, and everything we're doing seems to be the opposite of that.
Yeah, and the other thing that you said a moment ago, the whole paycheck deception stuff, that is here in Pennsylvania where I'm at, and bubbling up all across this country. Right now, the Supreme Court is about to hear the Janus versus AFSCME case, which would make the entire country for public sector workers a right-to-work country. And obviously, in West Virginia, you don't have collective bargaining rights, so you're already down that road. The next step is the paycheck destruction, though, making it harder for people to become members and pay their dues, and making it more expensive and difficult for unions to collect those dues.
Well, I mean, and the most interesting piece to me about this is that they ran that bill last year. It did pass the House and the Senate. The governor vetoed it. We had no indication that he would veto it again this year, and we had 1,500 to 2,000 teachers down here a couple weeks ago, and they ran that bill on that day. So if that's not an indication that you're trying to silence the voice of workers and employees and educators that are taking care of our children and making sure that they have a good education, it just doesn't make any sense.
No, I'm with you. It doesn't make. So let me ask you your kind of last line of questioning then, because today you had an incredible event. Tomorrow, another a day of action. What are you hoping comes out on Monday? I mean, we're going to have this wonderful, what I think is, a model maybe for working people across this country to take a look at and to internalize. What are you hoping happens on Monday and Tuesday of next week?
Well, we are really excited because we feel like we have the same number of people coming down here tomorrow that we had today, and we have said, since we announced the action, that we would go through Thursday and Friday, and we would make a determination on further action based on what the legislature does. So now it's in their hands. We've seen a lot of these bills have not really moved that attack our rights, so we feel like that's a direct result of our action. We believe that they are clamoring to put more funding into our public employees insurance plan, and we'll see. I mean, our folks, everything that they do just has fueled the flames. So because of the way that they have been talking about how much they care about education while attacking their labor leadership and calling us union bosses and our special interest groups, our members and our teachers are the union bosses, and the special interest groups are our students.
Yeah,
so they really care.
It's always been interesting to me, and this is one of those divisive moments where they try and divorce the workers from their unions, much like we've seen the right wing do, divorcing citizens from their government. This is one of the oldest tricks in the book, and not surprising that that's where they've gone first.
Well, and I think they were expecting on Wednesday that whatever they had done was going to deter people from coming down here, and it was just an amazing day.
Yeah. Well, maybe tomorrow you go and you stay through the weekend if nothing happens.
Yes, well, the legislators will be running out of town tomorrow afternoon.
Or maybe we go find their house and stay at their house.
Well, that's right. We'll be in their communities. That's how this started. They were doing it, going to their legislators, calling town halls, bringing them in, and that's where this began. And what they were getting in their communities actually caused them to say, look, I guess we're going to have to go to Charleston because they're not listening to us here.
Yeah.
So it's just been unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it, and I'm just so honored to be a part of it.
Good on your members, good on you, good on the work that you guys are doing and the solidarity that you're showing for each other. It's really a model for, I think, all working people to stand up and take notice of, because sadly, as the attacks on workers continue, it's going to be this kind of class solidarity, this kind of worker solidarity that hopefully will fend off those attacks. Christine, I appreciate you taking time for us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
I'd love to talk to you again as this continues. Thanks so much. Again, I look at this, and as I've been saying, this is, for me, this Janus case is the beginning of, in my view, the end of industrial peace. This is the kind of stuff I think, sadly, we're going to have to see again. But fortunately, you've got people to do it. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Marching on the Capitol, the lobby leaders for involvement. 3,000 people screaming out, where's our government? Lawsuits and arraignments under company surveillance. Public divided, either they love us or they hate us. Profit billions off our back, and it's still not enough. They should have took into account that we never give up. We'll be here one day longer. One day longer. The people's voice is stronger. The people's voice is stronger. We work hard for our money. We work hard for respect. Keep fighting for these rights for generations. It's next. One day longer. One day longer.
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2004. That was the day Secretary of Education Rod Page stated that he considered the National Education Association to be a terrorist organization. He made the remarks during a meeting with governors who were visiting the White House. His apology a few hours later was just as inflammatory. There he expressed his frustration at the, quote, obstructionist scare tactics the NEA's Washington lobbyists have employed against No Child Left Behind's historic reforms. Representing almost 3 million educators, the NEA had been fighting many aspects of the No Child Left Behind Act passed by Congress in 2001. The teachers' unions had initially supported the measure, but they came to realize that the act was designed to undermine public education in favor of charter, private, and religious schools. No Child Left Behind mandated regular standardized testing of students. It also threatened financial penalties and school closures. Governors on board with the goals of the act soon grew frustrated. The Bush administration reneged on federal funding necessary for its implementation. The union movement was outraged at Page's smear. John Sweeney, then president of the AFL-CIO, said, quote, "The Bush administration would like to label all those who disagree with it as terrorists in order to cover up its policies, which are harmful to working families and to divert attention from its inability to create good jobs." By 2015, the No Child Left Behind Act had received so much criticism from every corner that the Every Student Succeeds Act replaced it. This act retains Common Core standards but transfers school accountability to the states. It is now pending review under President Donald Trump's Regulatory Freeze Directive. In 2017, it was pending review under President Donald Trump's Regulatory Freeze Directive.
It's not enough. Whatever you get, a little bit more than you always need. A little more man, a little more seed. It's not enough. It's not enough. Whatever I do, whatever you get.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Pete sent me an email during the break, said, Rick, I heard the harden the schools comment by the NRA and Donald Trump. Do we need to harden malls, movie theaters, concert halls, public parks, fast food joints, street corners, rest stops, football fields, baseball parks, supermarkets, gas stations, and all of the other places where we live our lives? Do we have to harden every second of our day? And no, just the schools. The rest of you, never mind. Because this isn't about keeping anyone safe. This is about crisis management. This is about making sure that we don't get all worked up and stay all worked up and demand that they actually do something. So no, you're perfectly able to go to the mall and to the movie theaters and concert halls and all of that. Now, the crazy guy with a gun have been in all of those places. But, don't worry about it, because we're going to have good guys with guns all over the place. That's what they're pitching to us. That everywhere you go, there's going to be a good guy with a gun. And again, I've never seen a guy with a gun and go, oh, gee, thank goodness you're here, good guy with a gun. So it's just very, very strange times. Now, Ted Cruz was giving his little spiel at Crazy Pack. And he has been taking an absolute beating on the internet all day long. He said that the Democrats are the party of Lisa Simpson, and the Republicans are happily the party of Homer, Bart, Maggie, and Marge. Now, obviously, I guess he was talking about there was an episode where there was some gun control stuff they wanted to talk about. And Lisa, I guess, was part of it. There was an episode where she was president, had to clean up a whole bunch of mess after Donald Trump crashed the economy. I guess very foreseeing. Now, the thing is I just don't see. I see Lisa as a Democrat. I also see Marge kind of as a Democrat because she's kind of a hippie. Now, I don't know about Bart's kind of libertarian, maybe. Homer, I don't even know if Homer would bother to vote. But some of the funny responses, Anna Maltese, who is one of the writers for the show, said, as a Simpson animator for many years, I can say that with 100% certainty that A, Lisa is officially the conscience of the family, so awesome, and B, neither Marge nor Homer are Republicans. Matt Iglesias points out that Republicans are a cross-class alliance of Mr. Burns and Grandpa Simpson, which I think I would agree with that. I think that's a good one. Brandy Jensen says the worst thing you can do online is to anger teens, and the second worst is definitely expressing an ill-informed opinion on The Simpsons. Also agreed. Don't leave blank pointed out Ted Cruz. Dems are the party of Lisa Simpson. Lisa's the only intelligent character in the family. So are the dumb characters Republicans? Remember when Homer joined the NRA and used his semi-automatic pistol to change the channel on TV? I actually don't remember that one, but I don't doubt it. So there you go. But it just, I look at today and, I had this conversation with my daughter as I was taking her to her after-school job. And, I had asked, like any parent would do, are the kids around you, what are they thinking? Are they, doing some of the organizing like you're seeing in Florida? Are they planning to, is there anything going on? And she's like, well, the teachers are kind of trying to quell it all down. And she went into the one history teacher saying that, it's a stupid idea, to go marching out because you just open yourself up to gunmen. And I'm going, a history teacher saying this? It stopped me. But again, I live in a gun nut area. There is literally a free gun range, not more than 5 minutes from my house, to where, throughout the day, you'll hear gunshots popping off in the distance. And, and look, to quell the fears and the anxieties, you want to keep your pistol and do target shooting, God bless you. You want your pump action, shotgun, God bless you. It's these semi-automatic things. It's these large capacity magazines. It's these instruments of absolute death. And she was going into, kind of explaining, what the thought process was. And I couldn't help but remind her that when we did our civil rights tour, and good on her for remembering, to be honest, that, we went, to Birmingham to talk about, how all of the students left the high school. Because the civil rights movement was kind of at a lull point before Birmingham. Things were kind of heading downward, and it was all of these kids who left school, jumped out windows, ran outdoors, and it was the teachers who stood for the entire class period writing on the blackboard so that they didn't know if anyone was behind them or not, so they could have plausible deniability. Nope, I was at the blackboard the whole time. It was those kids that re-energized the movement. It was those kids that ultimately met the dogs, the fire hoses, and the tanks that Bull Connor had. That really, gave that image that people, the middle of the country saw and was appalled by. This idea that, no, you can't march. That's a bad idea. From a history teacher, nonetheless, is really very scary. Because when you understand that it's the kids that make the movement, they're the ones who spark these movements. They are the future of this country. They are the next generation to lead us. And it's just really, really twisted to me. And look, I know the administration saying, well, we can't have this huge walkout. We can't. Understand what education is about. Education is learning how to be a citizen. It's learning how to be a productive member of society. And it's learning how to participate in your democracy. And sometimes, and this is the thing that blows my mind, as a history teacher, you have to know that change happens in this country through civil disobedience. It has always been that way. And to have a history teacher, nonetheless, be the one attempting to quell that is really quite frightening to me. And I got to wonder if it's just about the gun. Because look, like I said, we're kind of in a gun nut area. And as I told my daughter, if you choose to participate, if something happens and you choose to participate, I will support you 100%. It's just that simple to me. Because they are the few, and I'll tell you what I'm seeing, good on them. They're not taking anything from anyone. They have their demands. They have articulate speakers saying, this is what we want. And they're using the process to go there. I got to be honest. If I were the parents of these kids, I would be thrilled to death. Because they get it. But I'm stuck at this. I'm stuck with this history teacher. I'm just stuck with this. And it's one of these things that I don't know what to do with it. Because it's just so So bizarre. You got to wonder, maybe he's a 60s radical who, was protesting the Vietnam War and turned to a right-winger. I don't know. Which a lot of them did. Which a lot of them are at the crazy pack listening to someone like Ted Cruz ramble on about The Simpsons. Think about paying money to go hear that. Honestly, truthfully, think about that. Think about paying money to go see that. It's crazy. Just crazy. But, I look at Pete's email here again, to talk about, these kids walking out of school and the teacher saying, you just open yourself up to be a target. Understand, while we have these weapons, we're targets every day. And I know some people are going to, I'm going to freak some people out and they're going to run for the corner and not leave the house. It's not what I'm trying to do. Understand, it's the gun. Don't let all of the distraction, the Lisa Simpson, the hardening of the doors, even Trump forgetting about whatever it is that we're talking about today in the meeting. Bring it back to what it is. It's about these murderous weapons. And about the NRA who has stood in the way of every bit of sanity that we've had. Now, there's a state representative here in Pennsylvania, Chris Rabb, who has put forth a piece of legislation to put everyone in a militia. Something I've advocated for years. You want everyone to have guns? Everyone should be in the military. That simple. This way, if we ever start a war again, the next ones, everyone will have skin in the game. I know how much the Republicans love skin in the game. Love to hear your thoughts. Going to take a quick break right back after this. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Janus case, the big weekend of action coming up in D.C. and all across the country. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
And the bills are creeping through the door. It's desperate times, so desperate measures we explore. Marching on the Capitol to lobby leaders for involvement. 3,000 people screaming out, "Where's our government?" Lawsuits and arraignments, members under company surveillance. Public divided, either they love us or they hate us. Profit billions off our backs, and it's still not enough. They should have took into account that we never give up. We'll be here one day longer. One day longer. The people's voice is stronger. The people's voice is stronger. We work hard for our money. We will talk for respect. Keep fighting for these rights for generations. It's next. One day longer.
It's been a problem that has been a long time in the making.
Minnesota settles with chemical industry giant over decades-long water contamination.
Sea levels are rising at an accelerating speed all around the world.
New report finds the next 5 years will determine sea levels for the next 300. Sea ice in the Arctic hits an ominous record low. Plus, Washington State becomes the latest state to block Trump's expansion of offshore drilling.
All of that Trump blocking and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
This agency shouldn't be in the business of saying we're going to favor certain sources of energy over others.
Unless those certain sources are oil or coal or gas. Am I right, EPA Chief Scott Pruitt? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, we are celebrating the 9th anniversary of the Green News Report all week. My thanks to those who have stopped by bradblog.com/donate to help us try to continue into our 10th year. Thank you very much. And
yes.
What do you have for us today, Ms. Doyen?
Well, industrial chemical giant 3M Company has agreed to pay the state of Minnesota $850 million to settle a major case over contaminated groundwater. Minnesota sued the company in 2010, alleging it damaged its natural resources and contaminated drinking water after decades of the company legally dumping perfluorochemicals, or PFCs. Those are used in fire retardants, nonstick cookware, and other products.
Post-it notes? Are they used in Post-it notes?
I don't think so.
Because that's all I know that 3M does.
Well, they do other stuff, too.
I see.
Prosecutors alleged that 3M researched PFCs and knew that the chemical posed a threat to human health and knew that it was contaminating groundwater. Here's Minnesota Attorney General Lori Swanson in a press conference on Tuesday.
We think that The settlement will help solve a problem for Minnesota. It's been a problem that has been a long time in the making. For many decades, these chemicals, as I mentioned, were put into the ground, and we are very hopeful that the settlement can help fix that.
The $850 million will go toward upgrading municipal water system filtration technology and environmental cleanup. 3M agreed to the settlement just hours before it was set to go to jury trial, but it did not admit liability and did not admit any health impacts linked to PFCs.
They never do.
Meanwhile, in climate science, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced this week that January 2018 was the 5th warmest January ever recorded globally. That means that the last 4 Januaries now rank among the top 5 warmest on record. And that warming is wreaking havoc at the poles.
At the election polls?
No, at the planet's poles.
Damn.
According to the U.S. National Snow and Ice Data Center, sea ice at both poles has hit the lowest levels on record again, shattering records set just last year. The Arctic is seeing the fastest rate of decline in sea ice in at least 1,500 years, and it's believed to be at its lowest winter extent since human civilization began more than 12,000 years ago. And making matters worse, the Arctic is also currently in a heat wave. The northernmost weather station in the world, located in Greenland, this week recorded daytime temperatures above freezing, despite the fact that the Arctic is still in the total darkness of polar night. And now a new study dramatically illustrates just how much the decisions we make in the next 5 years will impact future sea levels.
At the poles?
Everywhere. Even under the best-case scenario, scientists say we've already committed future generations to at least 3 feet of sea level rise by the year 2300. Now, a new study published in the journal Nature calculates that for every 5 years of delay in ramping down CO2 emissions, we will add an additional 8 inches to the burden of sea level rise borne by all future generations. That means wiping out trillions of dollars of coastal infrastructure around the world and likely forced population migration. But finally, there is a sliver of good news. Washington State has vowed to use every tool in its arsenal to block the Trump administration's planned expansion of oil drilling off of its shores. Following the footsteps of California, Washington State Public Lands Commissioner Hillary Franz told Reuters that she will reject permits, land leases, and easements that are required to support the offshore oil drilling industry, like distribution pipelines. She said in an interview, quote, "We didn't invite you here, and we don't want you here."
Go Washington. For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget you can download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. Now in our 10th year of the GNR, thanks to those of you who have stopped by bradblog.com/donate. And what are the rest of you waiting for? 8 more inches of sea level rise? I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
The tide is high, but I'm holding on. I'm gonna be your number one. I'm not the kind of girl who gives up just like that.
Volkswagen just invested in Tennessee in a right-to-work state at a low cost with less health care. Why should we prop others up when other companies can compete in this marketplace? It's time to let these people learn the lesson the hard way.
Suddenly I see, this is what I want to be. Suddenly I see.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. There you go, Zach Wamp, the good old former congressman from Tennessee. Hey, less health care, less wages. That's what we want. And you look at this, the case that's going to be heard on Monday by the Supreme Court, this Janus versus AFSCME case, is about imposing a national right-to-work law on all public sector workers from coast to coast. And it's one of those things that's just mind-blowing to me because it's brought to us by the people who keep telling us that they believe in states' rights. They keep telling us that they believe in the ability of the states to govern themselves and not to use the federal government as a bludgeon, and yet What are we doing? Well, just that. And this weekend, the labor movement's going to have a series of actions on Saturday, big rally, and all across the country, Washington, Philly, all over the place, to get workers out in the streets and have their voices heard. And here to talk a little bit about not just the day of action, but the Janus case, I've asked Marla Kilfoyle to come talk with us. She's the executive director of the Badass Teachers Association, and also Melissa Tomlinson. She's the assistant executive director of the BATS. Ladies, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having us, Rick.
I appreciate
Hi,
it.
Rick.
Hi, how are you tonight? So let me ask you, what are we planning for the weekend?
Well, personally, I'm going to Philly. That's the nearest protest near me. So I'm going to be marching with Ask Me and hopefully participating in a great day, sharing some time with my union brothers and sisters.
And Marla, what are you going to be doing?
I will be at home in my office on social media trying to share out as much of what is happening around the country. BATS this weekend are in coalition with Jobs for Justice and many other organizations that will be taking to the streets for the labor movement this weekend. So I'll be manning the computer and social media.
No, and I would argue that's one of the most important jobs, is to get the word out, because my fear is the mainstream media, the corporate-controlled media, doesn't cover it. There are other things going on. There's the Trump disaster and all of the sideshows that come along with that. And my fear is nobody hears about it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's, even if you go into schools, we will hear teachers say, well, what is the Janus case? And, it's disheartening. And we spent all last month on a Janus campaign because we want to make sure that teachers are educated about it, first and foremost, and that they understand the way that we beat the billionaires, we beat the Koch brothers, we beat the Mercer family. The way that we beat them is that we stick with the union. And that's it at the end of the day.
Yeah. Now, this case is going to be heard on Monday. Do you see any opportunity for it not to go the wrong way? I think universally people are expecting Neil Gorsuch, who is in the stolen Supreme Court seat, to cast the fifth and deciding vote that they couldn't get in Friedrichs to ram this through. Do you see any hope, any glimmer of hope for that not happening?
Well, Melissa and I went to the Friedrichs case last year. We actually stood in line outside the Supreme Court, and we actually got in to hear the Friedrich argument. And I think that, we're probably going to lose this, but I feel like Justice Roberts, at least in the Friedrichs case, and Melissa probably can expand on this a little bit more. I wasn't so convinced that he was 100% against us.
Right, but because if you remember, one of the things I've been hammering on, if you remember during his confirmation, he said that he was going to be a guy who calls balls and strikes. He believed in decided law, stare decisis, and he wasn't interested in legislating from the bench and doing all the things that I would argue this Janus case is absolutely going to do.
Yeah. Mel, what did you think?
Yeah, there were a lot of questions about the original Abood case raised, and they really seemed like they did not want to overturn that decision, which is ultimately what a negative decision in a case such as Janus would do. And they were very firm in their belief that, this set the precedent way back when, and this is what was needed then, and not only then, but also today, to make sure that workers' rights are protected.
So you're thinking Roberts could be the key in this? Because I've heard some people say that maybe Kennedy, definitely not Thomas or Alito, and probably not Gorsuch, but maybe Kennedy, maybe Roberts. So you have some hope?
Well, listen, I wouldn't agree with Kennedy. I think Roberts, like I said, Melissa and I saw the argument in Friedrichs, and at some point he didn't really convince me like he was for, overturning Abood.
Right. So let me ask you the arguments. I mean, because Mark Janis, the guy who brought this case, and I shouldn't say that. I hate saying that he brought it. It was the National Right to Work Defense Fund that brought it. You know, a Koch brothers initiative. You know, a whole bunch of billionaire money behind this stuff. They actually brought this, and most of the anti-union legislation or anti-union suits, along with the Fairness Center. You got to love that. What's the crux of the argument for people?
Mel, you want to answer that? I'm not sure I'm understanding what you're asking, Rick.
Well, what's his argument? I mean, why does he feel that this needs to go in his favor?
Oh,
I mean, when you're talking to people, explain, you know, what his argument is. When I say it, he's claiming he doesn't want to have to pay dues because he has an objection to what they do, and he feels it's a violation of his free speech rights to have to pay union dues.
Right. So it's basically a major complaint against the political activity that a union undertakes. But what a lot of people don't understand is that that activity and those stances and positions, they're all voted on at representative and delegate assemblies.
Right.
So if you don't like the way your union is deciding or the messaging that they're giving out or the way that they're lobbying for legislation, you have to get involved with the union to change those decisions. I mean, the unions aren't, even if we lose this case, the unions aren't going to go away overnight, and we're still going to have that advocacy and that lobbying. So what this case does is it's not going to take care of what he's claiming is the main issue.
So what do you think the response by the unions is going to be? You know, I've heard a lot of people saying they're doing a lot of internal organizing. They're spending a lot of time talking to their members. And I say, you know, that's great. Probably should have been doing that for the last 40 years. And also, while you're doing that, what you're not really doing is talking to other people. So you become even more of an insular movement. I'm curious of your thoughts.
Well, I know there's been a lot of... Sorry, Marla.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to speak about the coalition building that's been going on with the union and other community organizations at local level, state level, and national levels. The unions realize that they cannot act in isolation and that they have to be concerned with all social justice issues that affect the communities in which they operate. So I think that's kind of the second part of what you're looking there. You're looking for. They've been very instrumental in getting the word out about DACA. Right now, with the gun control legislation and violence in schools, we're putting together a campaign with NEA, AFT, and a couple other organizations to bring awareness not only to the gun violence in schools in relation to mass shootings, but the gun violence that our communities, especially communities of color, are seeing. So I think you're seeing a new vision of what the union really needs to be responsible for.
And as teachers, I mean, you know, the conversation now about arming teachers, there's got to be something around that as well, right?
Yes. I know my state has come out strongly against it. I'm sure national, if they have not put out a statement yet, it'll be forthcoming. And that's an interesting point. You know, when we push back against being armed in the classroom, which is the most ridiculous things to be in charge of a group of children and have a weapon, our union is going to be the one that helps us advocate for what's right in this situation.
Yeah. Well, I had one person, email me and say it might help keep the kids in line.
A lot of snark comments with that. Yeah.
I mean, I'm being, I'm just being kind of snarky, but at the end of the day, it seems like I agree with the senator from Alabama. It's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. But here again, you come back to this case. I've argued that for a while, labor needs to be much more militant, and I like what you guys do as a group of having much more militant teachers who are out on the front lines. So Marla, when you're looking at this and you're talking to your members and to other teachers, is that component of being a much more militant union member? Because I've argued I would like to see labor people be as militant as NRA members when it comes to their union cards.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And that's, as you know, that has been our focus since we booted up. And a lot of people gave us some grief about this name, the Badass Teachers. And they're like, well, And the main thing that we say is in fact, Priscilla Sandstead, one of the co-founders of BATCH, she said, look, teachers are tired of sitting at the table and raising our hands quietly and waiting to be called on. You know, we're going to turn the table over. We're going to show up. We're going to rally. We're going to write. We're going to lobby. And, you know, look, at the end of the day, and especially with what has just happened over the last couple of weeks, and just as Melissa said, you know, we have to embrace the strength of our union and be able to use that as a tool to raise our voices for our children, for the communities that we serve, and certainly for what is right and ethical in the world, right? So the union allows us to do that. And that's actually when BATS wrote an amicus brief in the Friedrichs case, when we filed an amicus brief, that was a big argument that we had. If you take away the union rights of teachers, you actually really take away our ability to advocate for children and for what our community needs. So we need to get loud, and we need to be badass.
Yeah,
That's it.
I agree. But what do you say to the person, Marlo, who says, you know, we're not taking your right to organize away. This is simply one person, Mark Janis, and a handful of other people, a couple of teachers who didn't want raises, who are saying, you know, we just want no part of this, and you go do what you're going to do, and we want no part of it.
Well, listen, we get that a lot. I was just in an email back and forth with a guy for about a week about that. Here it is at the end of the day. What you're doing is you're going to defund my union. That's really what this is going to do. It's going to defund the unions. So when you get people that don't want to pay but still want to get the services that the rest of us get that are paying, you're actively working to now defund my union. And when you defund the union, you now create a situation where we're not going to have representatives, we're not going to have the right to grieve things, you know, and eventually we could get the union decertified if enough people leave it. So that's what I say to people, that, okay, maybe you're not taking my right away to unionize, but you're defunding my union, and then you're going to create a situation where I'm going to lose my union altogether. And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, right. And Melissa, you know, you hear this free rider argument quite often. And look, I've tried to go to, you know, Chamber of Commerce or other groups that you have to be a member to get discounts. And I've asked, hey, can I have your discounts? Can I get some of your benefits? And they always universally tell me no. So it seems to me that, you know, there's a valid argument that unions negotiate contracts, they enforce contracts, they fight for better wages, hours, and conditions. If you don't want to be a member, you don't have to, but you do have to pay for the representation and the enforcement of the contract, right?
Exactly. And, you know, we always hear the argument, well, if you're not going to be a member of the union, you don't get legal representation. And people are like, oh, I never do anything wrong. I'm not going to need legal representation. But the atmosphere that educators are working in today, we are so quick to be blamed for single incidents within a district, statewide incidents, national incidents. Not to have that right to and that access to legal representation is actually a very scary thing right now.
Yeah. So last line of questioning I've got for you, because, you know, there are a lot of teachers who are probably listening to this going, you know, what do I do? I mean, at the end of this is going to be out of the hands of us at this point right now. The Supreme Court is going to make the decision it's going to make. It'll probably come out sometime in June. What do teachers today do? What do you want folks doing?
Honestly, use West Virginia as an example right now. West Virginia is a right-to-work state, yet they're organizing and ignoring the fact that they don't have complete union representation as, say, New Jersey does. They've made the connections, they've built the relationships, and they shut down an entire state of school districts, closed for the day, and they were striking at the Capitol. That right there is what we need members to do, regardless of whether or not we have a full union as we do today.
No, I agree. You know, it's going back to that militancy that built the labor movement from the beginning. You didn't ask for permission. You just did it. Marla, your final thought?
Yeah, you know, to springboard off what Melissa said, what people can do is stay in the union. If you don't like the way your union's being run, whether it's a political activity or whatever, get involved, run for office. Melissa and I have both run. We've got tons of people in BATS that have run. the bottom line is you've got to stick with your union, because if you don't, at the end of the day, that's going to come around and bite you.
And not just you, everybody else and all your coworkers.
Right.
And it's, again, we used to know this stuff. Sadly, we have to learn it again. Melissa, Marla, I appreciate you guys taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, Rick.
Good stuff. Thank you so much. You can check out some of their stuff at the Badass Teachers Association's website. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1860. That was the day that the shoemakers of Lynn, Massachusetts walked out on strike. The shoemakers were very concerned over how technology was changing their work. Shoemaking had long been considered a skilled craft. Making shoes was typically done as piecework in the homes of the craftsmen. Often, other family members, including the women of the household, helped to make the shoes. But technological advances transformed the industry. The introduction of the Singer sewing machine in 1852 moved more shoemaking into factories. Many young women went to work stitching at these machines. What was once considered highly skilled work was now transforming into mass production. Then, to make matters worse, in 1857, a depression swept across the nation. Shoemakers saw their wages slashed. In response, on George Washington's birthday, the shoemakers went out on strike. They demanded an industry-wide standard wage. 20,000 workers joined the strike. 20,000 more supported the striking workers at protests and parades. 2 weeks into the conflict, women from the factories took to the streets, joining the strike. But the male shoemakers were weary of joining their cause to that of the women. Predictably, this division aided in causing the strike to falter and fade. Although the strike was not successful, it drew national attention to the plight of workers. During the conflict, presidential candidate Abraham Lincoln spoke out in support of the workers. He said, "I'm glad to see that a system of labor prevails in New England in which laborers can strike when they want to, where they are not obliged to labor whether you pay them or not. I like a system that lets a man quit when he wants to and wish it might prevail everywhere." Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Like I said, on Saturday, there are going to be events all across the country with labor folks out in the streets saying, look, we need to unrig the economy. We need to have fairness. We need to have a voice on the job. We need to have some sanity. And look, at the end of the day, as I've been saying for a while, it's going to take people in the streets. It's going to take us, you, me, in the streets fighting for better wages, hours, conditions, opportunities. And it's going to take our children in the streets. Look, there are 2 national marches planned in the next 2 months. The March March 14th, is a 17-minute walk out of school. 1 minute for each one of the victims of that horrible shooting. And then on April 20th, it's a full-day march where they're going, look, we're going to bring attention to this one way or another. We're going to elected officials' offices. We're going to the capitals. We are going to be heard one way or another. And as I said, earlier, if my daughter says she wants to go, I'll write her a note to get out of school so they can't get her in any trouble. Because this is how you change things. Active, engaged, educated citizens going to their elected leaders, seeking redress of grievances. And I would argue it's a pretty powerful grievance, saying we don't want our children killed in their classrooms or on their street corners or in the malls or in the parks or in the schoolyards or in the playgrounds or in the parks or wherever. It just seems sane and rational and good on these kids. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com.